Hey guys, this is Gatsby with Tape, and today you join me for another episode of Real Solar System Project Luna, and we start, as we often do, with a launch abort system test. We are now ramping it up to 3-man capsules for our actual moon mission, but before we launch 3-man capsules, of course we will be testing abort systems. Now I have the standard Apollo abort system, the pre-made part here, and I'm going to see how it performs trying to escape from this solid rocket booster, just to make sure it works well for this pod, because it is a little heavier than the actual Apollo pod, and because of that it doesn't escape particularly quickly. It does escape the vehicle, but I'm not super confident with that, so back to custom, well, after landing safely, which it does, the parachutes work, at least that part of the test was successful. So, back to custom abort systems, 4 Ullage motors, not enough thrust for this heavy pod. So, we step it up to 8 Ullage motors, and we abort extremely cleanly and escape nicely. That's a rather good abort, and I'm very happy with it. But let's go take a look at the vehicle that will be hoisting this into space. So I'm here in the VAB, taking a look at the Griffin 1, the first vehicle we'll be launching today, launching the pod you just saw, and this is our first actual kind of heavy lift manned test. In Griffin 1 there will be no Kerbals, of course. This will be probe controlled, and it's mostly testing re-entry from sort of Mooner speeds, the kind of lunar speeds, I guess, the kind of speeds you'd be expecting coming back from the moon. So we're using the heavy lift vehicle with the 3rd stage to do that. The vehicle itself, the first 2 stages, is the Gigantus 1R2 from last episode, the biggest one. So if you want to know more about the rocket itself, you can go back and watch that, but I'm not going to explain it again. The only difference is it has this little adapter here to shrink down to the size of the 3rd stage and capsule. So we're just going to look at the 3rd stage and capsule right now. So the 3rd stage, of course, once all of this has been hoisted into orbit, we'll be putting it on a trajectory roughly, towards the moon to test re-entry from those kinds of speeds. And it will be doing that with a J2 engine. Of course, the Saturn V's 2nd stage engine and 3rd stage engine. I think it used 4 or 5 on the 2nd stage. Oh my god, how do I not know the actual number? And on the 3rd stage, just 1. It provides 1,000 kilonewtons of thrust, of course using the Saturn, and it burns hydrolox, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, so it's not very dense. And this 3rd stage is much smaller than we'll expect on the real mission because, well, we're not bringing a lander with us. This is just our first test vehicle. Anyway, so moving on to the pod, which actually is quite close to hopefully what the final vehicle will be. We'll just throw that away, and let's take a look at it, I guess from top to bottom, from bottom to top. So it starts with its propulsion system, which uses 3 AJ-10 upper stage engines. These are the extended versions, actually. These provide 35.1 kilonewtons of thrust each. The AJ-10, of course, a very successful American engine used on the Vanguard, the Apollo CSM, Delta vehicles, and I think a few others, actually. And this is the extended version, which just gets a little more thrust. And yeah, it's just a really great engine. It burns UDMH and IRFNA3, which is a pretty nasty mix. UDMH, of course, unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine, and IRFNA3 is red fuming nitric acid 3, which is pretty horrible sounding. I mean, I assume it's safe for Kerbals, maybe? Fuck it, it's fine. And then the pod itself is the Mark III pod, not the Apollo pod, because I'm not going for an exact Apollo thing. It'll be pretty close to Apollo, but I don't want to use the actual Apollo pod, because then I'd have to use a bunch of other Apollo stuff and it'd be lame. So, yeah. This has built-in RCS thrusters, which burn nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine, and there's an extra few tanks of that down here, along with some batteries and solar panels, of course, decently sized for just keeping the crew alive. And then above that is, of course, the abort system, which you just saw. 8 of these Ullage motors, with one of them throttled down and fueled down a little bit. But yes, that is the vehicle. So let's go and see it fly on its first mission. Yes, so now it is time to launch the Griffin 1, the first launch of the Gigantus 1 with a real payload. The finalized Gigantus 1, probably. I might actually still change up the engine setup, but I'm actually quite liking it as it is. Anyway, it takes off rather well. No crew, of course, today, because we're just testing the pod itself in an automated state. It has a probe on top, and hopefully we'll be able to get ourselves a nice re-entry. So the plan for this mission is to launch into orbit, use the 3rd stage to boost the pod into the kind of trajectory you'd expect coming back from the moon, and then we'll deorbit and test re-entry. We're just going to get rid of that escape system right now. Oh, almost perfect timing. Yeah, so we're getting rid of the escape system, everything's going rather well, the rocket's looking rather nice, and yeah. So hopefully this will work. Hopefully we'll be able to get some important information about the vehicle. If it doesn't work, of course, we can just improve the vehicle. That is the point of testing. And I don't want to kill any more Kerbals, as I have in previous episodes. And also, like, if I'm going to do a whole series about building a system to go to the moon, I should probably test it, because otherwise it would just be one launch, and then... yeah. Anyway, but yes, we are propelling ourselves on into orbit. Now, the payload is much lighter than what the real payload will be, because it doesn't have a lander, and therefore it also has a much smaller third stage. So we'll actually have quite a lot of fuel left over in the second stage, because, well, of course it's a much lighter payload. It's, I think, maybe 70 tons, so, you know, it's much, maybe 80, I don't know. But anyway, we won't be using that fuel, though, because we just don't need to, and we want to test the third stage, not the second stage. We know the first two stages worked very well from the last episode, because, well, they performed perfectly. In fact, as we found out, the first stage can fly, can continue on its mission while losing one of the outer engines, which is quite impressive and a very, well, just an important thing to have in a vehicle with multiple engines. The Falcon 9 is actually capable of this, as I've said multiple times, and I'm sure you maybe even know there are videos of one of the engines failing and it carrying on with its mission and only messing up its secondary payload, but yeah. Anyway, we make it to orbit, decouple our third stage, with over 1 kilometer per second of delta V left in the second stage, so we're pretty confident in the power of the rocket itself. But now we fire up that J2 engine, and are going to put ourselves onto a nice little trajectory to go out to basically the altitude of the moon, and then come back. So yeah, the third stage working pretty well, the thrust-to-weight ratio looking pretty nice, and it does in fact put us on the correct trajectory. So the third stage test is complete. Not much that could go wrong there in the Kerbal Space Program, but still good to test it. And then we're going to decouple that with still a little delta V left in it, so that's not bad. And you can see the pod itself. You've already seen it, but I do like how this looks, actually. I really like the 3-engine setup. I guess it's kind of like... this looks a lot like the Orion capsule, in my opinion, which... I think it's forever changing because of governmental changes in the US, but still, the multiple engines on the back, everything else, I really do like how this looks, and I think this is the design I am going to go for, with just a few tweaks for our actual command module for going out to the moon. The lander, of course, will be designed at a later date. But yes, so we've got ourselves on our trajectory, and we're just going to follow it now. Make sure our solar panels are orientated towards the sun, make sure they're getting enough power. The RCS system on this isn't super great because it's just on the pod, and we do have problems with that later, as you will see. Anyway, so... we're going to need to do our deorbit burn early, because we actually won't have comms all the way out to Abort. I made a little oversight of getting a long antenna for going out to the orbit of the moon, so that was rather dumb. So we're just going to do a quick little burn here to bring up our periapsis down. However, the RCS kind of screws it up. The RCS is very flaky, and every time I move, you can see it's changing my periapsis quite significantly. And we're going to have to correct that later, actually. The biggest problem, really, today is the RCS. We're now too low in the atmosphere. I don't want to be below 75 kilometers because, well, the heating would definitely be too intense, and I think 75 kilometers might be pushing it anyway. And now we're down to 68 kilometers, so we're going to get within comms range, and we're going to try and rectify that. Now, the engines are unstable at this point due to the zero gravity, well, the zero G, and... the RCS actually doesn't work to provide ullage because it can't fire forward, and firing backwards does kind of the opposite. We do a little spin, do manage to get it all working, and we do basically fix our trajectory, but we have so much trouble with this. I'm just going to leave this all here so that you can see just how much flailing there was. The RCS was terrible, and every time I moved it changed the trajectory, and then I was, well, burned retrograde foolishly instead of to the normal direction. And yeah, but eventually, you know, after lots of trying and having to transfer more fuel into our RCS tanks, we do eventually get the correct periapsis. 77 kilometers sounds about right. So we're going to stick with that, and we're going to deorbit. But on future versions of this, I will need a much upgraded RCS system. Actually, just some dedicated RCS thrusters on the service module would be absolutely fine. I just kind of thought the pod stuff would be better, but it's probably really just for re-entry, so it was foolish to think that. But anyway, now it is time for re-entry, and hopefully it will go rather well. No Kerbals, of course, so the cost is little. No loss of life. He says, foreshadowing. But basically, the problem, really, is limited control, and the probe core sticks off the top and burns off, which means we have no control, so I couldn't get orientated correctly because it burned up more quickly than I was expecting. This wouldn't be a problem if we had Kerbals in the cockpit, but still it doesn't give me a ton of confidence, and the parachutes do burn off from the swing. Again, with Kerbals in the cockpit, this may not have happened, but still, I'm not super satisfied with this and do want to verify this with a better system. So, we're going to go again. I won't show you the whole launch, but we're launching basically the same payload with just a few tweaks. Basically improved control systems, better RCS, and I think some more stuff on the pod if I remember rightly. Anyway, yeah, the launch goes fine. You can also see that we're using ullage motors to separate the first stage. That is just to make this a little cleaner, because I have had problems in testing where I've had problems losing the second stage engine when the stage decouples. So I added some ullage motors to make that a little cleaner. Anyway, we make it to orbit, and all is well. So now we're going to carry out basically the same maneuver, just with improved RCS to make it a little easier. So we fire up the J2 once again, and there's still quite a lot of fuel in the second stage, as before. A high-performing rocket, for surely. And yeah, so then we just get our trajectory onto pretty much the same kind of trajectory as before. So that's looking good. So now we just need to get rid of the third stage because, well, we don't need that anymore. It's, again, performed pretty much exactly the same. And yeah, so we're just going to move on to the command module, to the service module of the command module, which you can see there's some little RCS thrusters there now. Much better than it was previously. And we'll decouple, and you can see we just get rid of that little beam as well. It's got a slightly complicated decoupling system with two little parts because the three engines gives you nowhere to actually like connect the stage to. But anyway, yes, so we use the RCS. It's working, which is good. Burning, I think, monomethyl hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. But yes, and then anyway, on the other side of the planet, we fire up the RCS to provide ullage, do our deorbit burn cleanly, much cleaner than before, and then get rid of the service module and enter the atmosphere. So we're going to make sure we're a little more careful lining up. So we've decoupled the service module early, and we're going to activate the RCS in the pod so that we can actually get pointing retrograde, so we have more chance of surviving re-entry. I find the button there, finally. And line myself up retrograde, and we're going to lock it in. And hopefully not hit the service module on the way down. It would be rather bad if we scraped our heat shield, although I don't think that's a feature in RSS, although maybe it should be. Scraping heat shield, not a great idea. Anyway, we do lose the probe again, so we lose control, but we have lined up properly, and we do go through re-entry naturally stably, and everything is fine. We pick up a little heating, and we do lose the drogue chutes, but the main chutes survive all the way through the first bounce off the atmosphere, and so does the heat shield. So it proves that this pod is capable of this. It proves that the heat shield is capable. We've lost a lot of ablator, but on the second way round, we wouldn't need as much. However, on the second way round this time, we had no control, and the pod sort of burns up. But, you know, hey, we didn't have any control, but I'm very happy with this test. It proves the pod works, the heat shield is fine, and just this is a generally effective system. But anyway, right now, let's move on to something a little different. So now we're taking a look at ML1, Moonlander 1, the most inventive name you've ever heard. I know, I'm a goddamn genius. But anyway, yes, so this is Moonlander 1, a probe for landing on the moon, which is right there. It's going to be our first attempt at landing anything on the moon, and it's launching aboard a Taurus 2, one of our oldest and a very reliable vehicle, and just very good. We used it a lot, so I'm not going to talk through it, but you can go back and see it fly a bunch of times. It's very good, and that's what we've picked. But the payload is entirely new. It has itself a little kind of third stage, or I guess just transfer stage. This again is just using an AJ-10 extended because it's a really good engine. We saw it just now, so I mean, I thought might as well use it again. This is burning UDMH and well, the same thing before, you know, the horrible acid and hydrazine and shit, and gets like 3.3 kilometers per second of delta V with this little stage, so not bad at all. But then we'll move on to the lander itself, actually landing on the surface of the moon. This is using a Rutherford vacuum engine, which is actually the second stage engine of the Electron rocket. If you remember, I think last month, or maybe, yeah, last month, the Electron rocket launched for the first time, which is a very small rocket for putting small payloads in orbit very cheaply, and it uses the Rutherford engine for its second stage, and the Rutherford vacuum engine for for its second stage. Should I say for the Rutherford engine for the first, Rutherford vacuum for the second, if I got that wrong before. Anyway, but yes, this is pretty good. It provides 22 kilonewtons of thrust, so it's quite good for landing on the moon. I think it is slightly throttleable. And it burns kerosene and liquid oxygen, which doesn't boil off too quickly, so that's quite good for going to the moon. Yeah, other than that, structurally, it's using these little struts to make, to kind of extend its landing legs outward and downward for a better, kind of more stable landing situation. On the bottom, there are a couple of, well, 4 attitude jets, which are just RCS thrusters burning hydrazine. That'll help with ullage and also just a little bit of control if I need it. It's got a few solar panels, big-ass battery, antenna, reaction wheel, that kind of stuff. The usual. But yeah, so let's go and see this fly and hopefully land on the moon. So once again, we're launching in the dark because we have to be lined up for the moon, but you can still basically see the rocket. Yeah. So of course the Taurus 2 firing up its solid rocket boosters and its main engine now, climbing skyward to hoist this payload to the well, to the heavens and eventually to the moon, where it will hopefully land successfully. Now it is a little harder to land on the moon in RSS, partly because obviously it has much higher gravity. It's actually quite a lot like landing on Tylo in normal Kerbal Space Program, but mostly because you can't throttle engines very deeply, so you kind of have to do a bunch of, you either have to do a perfect suicide burn or a bunch of kind of just hitting full throttle and hoping you get it right. But hopefully I'll be able to do this. I've been playing this game a long time, and it's not the first time I've landed on the moon in a real solar system. So hopefully it should be fine. But yeah, the launch is going rather well. The problem with the Taurus 2 is it's always a bit squirrely in the lower atmosphere due to it only having one main engine, so limited roll control. But other than that, it's pretty good. I wouldn't put Kerbals on it because that would seem rather dangerous, but I'm happy to put probes on it. This was just, the second vehicle I built in this series, and it's performed quite a few missions. I think all of the moon impact mission and the moon flyby mission, some other stuff, I think. So yeah, not bad at all. Anyway, the first stage burns out, and we light up the second stage, get rid of those fairings, and carry on towards orbit. Now, yeah, these launches do take a little while in RSS, but I don't want to cut them all out, and it is quite nice and serene watching them slowly get into orbit just in time. I guess that's just sort of how the engines are designed there, right? I mean, you just pick the right thrust-to-weight ratios and you'll be fine. I always go for a little higher thrust-to-weight ratio than you really need, just to kind of make it easier on myself. It's probably not the most efficient way of doing it, but then neither is flying a rocket by hand. It's really the realm of computers, but it's actually impressive that you can do it by yourself at all. Like, it is surprising that a human can fly a rocket to orbit. Obviously, it's a little more complicated than in real life. It would be more complicated in real life, but still, impressive nonetheless. Anyway, so after getting into orbit, we get our maneuver planned in, locked in to get to the moon. And it's looking pretty good. We should be fairly close. I'm going to get a little closer than that. But yeah, we've got more than enough Delta V, so all is well. And then, while traveling over Australia, we fire up the second stage engine. Actually a little early, because there's not a lot of ground stations over Australia, in Australia, so I thought it best to kind of be err on the side of caution and correct later. I even deleted the maneuver node. We're just going to eyeball this because, you know, space it's not rocket science. Anyway, so yeah, you saw the second stage of the rocket actually did the first kind of kilometer and a half of the burn, and now the third stage, the third stage, the transfer stage takes over. That's just because, well, we didn't have enough Delta V in the transfer stage alone to do the whole burn and get into orbit of the moon, so it just made sense to use the second stage since it had a bunch of Delta V in it. Anyway, yes, so I have lost control of the vehicle. However, apparently I still have throttle control, so not to worry. There's no communication, but apparently, yes, I can still control throttle inexplicably. This must be remote tech easy mode, but whatever. And now we're just going to tweak the orbit a little bit here, because obviously I burned early, so we're way off. But if I do that burn, we should get to the moon and have enough Delta V to get into orbit of the moon. So we do the burn with the third stage a little later in our orbit. We've, again, got more than enough Delta V for all of this. However, I screwed up a little bit inexplicably, and then fix it again, and it looks like we're going to be pretty close to the moon. And then we arrive. Hello, moon. Good to see you. We'll be landing on you imminently. Hopefully not attacking you like last time, where we just dropped a big egg on you. Yeah, that was kind of the mission last time. Just drop an egg on the moon. You know, it's science, man. It's, you know, sometimes it's more art than science. Anyway, then we flip ourselves around, get ready to do our orbital insertion burn, and we'll be on our way. It's actually looking like we'll have more than enough Delta V in the third stage to do this, and we'll be able to use part of the third stage for carrying out our landing burn, so that we can save a little fuel in the lander itself. So that's quite good, especially given that there's a very high thrust to weight ratio on the third stage now that we're around the moon and low on fuel. So yeah. We pull ourselves into orbit, no problem. I don't know why I'm always expecting that there will be problems. It's not like engines frequently explode in KSP. You can get a mod that does that, and maybe I should, because it is a bit of fun having to deal with something like that. Although, I don't know, I kind of like emergent problems rather than rather than just get problems you create. I don't know. Anyway. So we actually do our deorbit burn now here as well, just because we'd lose comms on the dark side of the moon, so I just did it at the same time as our orbital insertion. And now we're descending onto the moon, firing up the third stage, getting rid of that fuel and slamming it into the moon, so that at least the moon can be free of Kessler syndrome if the Earth is not. And then we move on to our landing stage, deploying our landing legs early just so we don't forget, and hopefully landing rather well. We've only got about 1 kilometer per second of delta V velocity to burn off right now, and more than enough delta V. So yeah, if I can, well, time my burns correctly, it should be okay. So just, yeah, I'm occasionally burning off a bit of velocity. Not the most efficient way of doing it. Really, you want to do it in a suicide burn, just kind of right at the end, but I'm not super confident that I'll be able to time that perfectly. You can see we're going for this little crater here, which seems like a good place to land. So we fall slowly, fire up the engine, occasionally just burning off more and more velocity, getting below 100 meters per second now, and then we'll soon be below 50, and then below 10, and then we'll be stopped, I guess. And yeah, just before we land, we're going to go into 1 times time accelerate right now, so you can see the landing in real time. And you can see what I'm doing is just very occasionally firing up the engine to basically null my velocity, but not quite, and then just keep falling towards the surface, so that I come in as slow as possible. And I think that was the second to last burn, and we're gonna wait and do the landing burn right now, and we touch down perfectly. Ow, I just hit myself on my desk. Out of excitement. Anyway, but yes, we are down on the moon. Nothing is broken, nothing hurts, and everything is good. We get ourselves a nice little screenshot there, and then check the system's over. Nothing is broken, the landing legs are all in good shape, and all is well. Shame I didn't put any scientific equipment on this probe. The scientists were like, wait, no! We were like, oh shit, man, we forgot, sorry. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing. So I thought I'd just jump back into the VAB real quick for the Griffin 3 mission, because I want to look at just the sum total of the changes we've made this episode to the whole vehicle, because there have been quite a few, and I don't usually do this for the smaller changes, but some of them were interesting. So on the second stage, or the first stage even, as you'll have seen in the last launch, it actually now has a couple of Ulich motors. This is for separating this first stage more cleanly, because I've had a few problems where the engine sort of gets destroyed. The second stage engine gets destroyed by the interstage fairing in testing. Yeah, so I did that to fix that, and yeah, that's the only real change to the rocket. The vehicle itself does have a couple of changes. Mostly, it has these new RCS thrusters for, well, just better Ulich control and attitude control, since the first mission was such a shambles, and these really helped in the second mission. And since we're about to launch some Kerbals, I was thinking I'd be extra safe. So we've got this nice little extension on the front now. We've brought the docking port forward a bit to house a couple of things. Firstly, a backup parachute, because if the other parachutes burn off, we are not having our Kerbals die again because of, you know, not having parachutes. So we brought an extra parachute. I think it's just good to have a backup parachute, and I'm going to keep that on the main mission as well. And we have a reaction wheel. It's important to have a reaction wheel for fine control in the atmosphere. We need to make sure we point the exact right way, and it's just useful to have one anyway, so I brought along a reaction wheel. So those are the few changes. They are really important, they are quite small, but yeah. Anyway, let's go and see this fly. Hopefully it'll perform very well with these changes, and hopefully our Kerbals will be, well, alive at the end. So, spurred on by the success at the moon, Jeb, Bob, and Bill have come back to life inexplicably. I think I just forgot to turn off the thing that does that. But hey, the big three are back, so that's good. And Val is back as well, so it's great. So, yeah. Now we're doing our launch of course, the Griffin 3 mission, which is the first of these missions we've been seeing today, which is manned. And it's not going to go into a high orbit, it's just going to go into low orbit to just test the re-entry characteristics of the capsule. If we compare that knowledge to the successful half re-entry from last time, we should know if this will be a successful mission, I think. So yeah. We decouple the second stage, fire up the third stage, and we'll be getting on into orbit in no time. This is, of course, a very cut-down version of the launch because you've seen it thrice today. So, yeah, here we are just finally pushing ourselves on into orbit. The Kerbal's looking a little worried after last time, after the parachute sort of burned off and they died in the Sahara. Oh no, it was the Middle East, so that's a little less deserty, I guess. Anyway. So we're in orbit now. We decouple the pod. We leave the third stage attached to the second stage. That was really just there for ballast because apparently we just have unlimited money in this space program. Just all the money, man. Yeah, fuck it. Put a third stage on there. Use the big rocket. Whatever, man. I'm gonna go to my trailer. Yeah, our director lives in a trailer. I don't think he's doing well, man. We should land on the moon, make him feel better. What are you talking about, man? Anyway, let's go and do our deorbit. We didn't spend much time in orbit. We just, looped round to the other side, did our deorbit burn. These people are here for their job. They're not looking at space anymore. They're just excited about the moon. They want to get back so they can get back on another rocket if they don't die, which hopefully they won't. This should go fine. Anyway, we decouple the second stage. No, actually the fourth stage, I guess, technically. The service module. I don't know why I can't get the stage numbers right in my head. Yeah, but anyway. And then we line ourselves up. We're going to do our deorbit. We have a reaction wheel, of course, as I explained earlier. And the backup parachute. So nothing could go wrong. If the parachutes burn off, we have another parachute. If, nothing, it'll be fine. And we have rather nice controls, so we can stay pointed directly retrograde, so not even the docking port burns off, which I'm very proud of, which I'm very surprised at, because it burned off constantly before. But yeah, everything's looking rather good, because this is hopefully the final format of the capsule itself. I would like to have a backup parachute for realsies. Not even the drogue chute burns off, so yeah, everything's rather good. The antenna gets a little hot, but even that survives, so rather perfect. Re-entry works. We used barely any ablator there, so combined with the 300 we had left over from last time, which should be fine. We pull the drogue chutes, get ourselves subsonic, cut the drogue chutes, pull the main chutes, don't even have to pull the second chutes, drop the heat shield, it slams into us and kills the three guys again. Fuck. How does this keep happening? So, successful mission, except when I decoupled the heat shield and then it kind of slammed back into the pod and just killed everyone. Yeah, it was a little heavy. I was like, maybe we should get rid of it, and that was a mistake. So, yeah, anyway, that's 7. Alright, I'll see you next time.